Welcome to the second lecture in this series on the League of Nations. Today we will be examining the question of, to what extent did the League of Nations establish peace in the 1920s? Firstly, we will examine the context of Europe in the 1920s to understand why the League faced a difficult task to handle a volatile situation. Secondly, we will examine the early success stories of the League of Nations and how they settled disputes among European nations. However, we will then examine how the League of Nations struggled to deal with issues, especially when the League had to deal with more powerful nations. Finally, we will examine how the League was undermined by diplomatic events that occurred outside the League's jurisdiction. Even though the League of Nations had representative nations from all across the world, we will be mostly focused on events in Europe. This is because Europe was the center of the political stage following World War I. As we saw in previous lecture, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires had broken up during World War I and created lots of smaller nations. Each of these nations needed to establish a good relationship with their neighbors and also establish their own political system. Since Europe was fragmented, there were frequent border disputes. This is when two countries that shared a land border disagreed about where that border should be. This was especially important when the border sat near towns and settlements, or near natural resources. The situation was so volatile that conflicts were breaking out all across Europe and borders were heavily guarded at all times. Supposedly, a conflict between Bulgaria and Greece broke out in 1925 after a Greek soldier's dog strayed over the border to Bulgaria. When the soldier went to retrieve his beloved dog, he was shot by a Bulgarian guard. This resulted in an invasion by the Greek army as retribution. The incident shows just how easily wars could break out in Europe. The League was expected to intervene and negotiate peace terms between two conflicting nations. However, this wasn't a straightforward task, and part of the reason for this was the power imbalance between nations. Most nations were members of the Assembly, but France, Japan, Italy, and Britain were members of the Council. This meant they carried greater influence. However, this causes problems when the leaders of these nations do not act with the collective aim of international peace in mind. Let's now examine the ways in which the League achieved success during the 1920s. In 1921, a conflict broke out between Germany and Poland over the region of Upper Silesia, which sat on the border between the two nations and was an important coal and steel region. When Poland appealed to the League for support, the League held a plebiscite so the people could decide their nationality. A plebiscite is a people's vote, like a referendum. The French and British sent troops to monitor the polling booths to ensure calm. Germany won by 60%, but Poland complained some who had voted no longer lived in Upper Silesia. Therefore, the League decided to split the region according to how people voted. Germany received a rural area, whilst Poland kept the industrial area. Germany were given a discount on coal from the region to help their industry. Both countries accepted this outcome as a compromise, even though they were not fully satisfied. This therefore shows a key success for the League. The biggest success that the League had was the resolution of a conflict between Sweden and Finland in 1921. Both nations lay claim to the Åland Islands, which sat between them. The League intervened and decided the islands should go to Finland. However, Finland was not allowed to build any forts on the islands, so they could not be used as a base to attack Sweden. Both countries accepted these terms, and so this was a victory for the League. However, one could argue that this was only a small conflict between two nations that did not hold much sway on the European stage. so it was easier for the League to intervene. Another key success comes in September 1926, when Germany was allowed entrance into the League of Nations as a council member. This was due to the hard work of the German Foreign Secretary Gustav Stresemann, who sought reconciliation with Germany's old enemy of France. This meant that the League's reputation also gained a boost as Germany was more likely to consult the League with their problems. However, this success was short-lived since Germany only remained part of the League until Hitler came to power in 1933, when he famously stormed out of a disarmament conference. Let's now examine the failings of the League in the 1920s. In 1920, the same year the League was formed, there was a conflict between the two new countries of Poland and Lithuania that had been created after the division of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The city of Vilna was made the capital of Lithuania, but the majority of people in the city wanted to be Polish. The Polish army took control of the city, and so Lithuania appealed to the League for help. The League commanded Poland to withdraw troops, but they refused to do so. France decided they would not intervene, because they saw Poland as an ally against Germany, and Britain refused to send troops without the support of other countries. As a result, the League were powerless and Poland took control of Vilna. The second failing took place on the island of Corfu. The border between Greece and Albania remained undecided in 1923, and so the League commissioned an Italian general called Tellini to investigate and resolve the matter. While in Greece, Tellini was murdered. This caused the Italian dictator Mussolini to blame the Greek government. He demanded the execution of the murderers and compensation payment, but the Greeks did not know who had committed the murder, so they could not oblige. As a result, Mussolini invaded the Greek island of Corfu and killed 15 people. This was an especially alarming incident since Italy was a council member, and so Mussolini held a strong influence over the League. Greece appealed to the League for help, and in return, the League issued a moral condemnation to Italy. This outraged Mussolini, who then appealed to his fellow council members Britain and France separately for support. As a result, the League, on the behest of the Allies, made Greece issue an apology to Italy and pay compensation. Only at this point did Mussolini withdraw his troops. This incident proved the League was not effective as a peacemaking body since it could not remain impartial when one of the council members was involved. A year later, in 1926, the War of the Stray Dog broke out on the border between Greece and Bulgaria. After the Greek soldier was killed on the Bulgarian border, Greece retaliated with a land invasion. Bulgaria appealed to the League, who in turn condemned Greece for their actions. However, Greece accused the League of hypocrisy since they'd allowed Mussolini to invade Corfu after a similar injustice. However, Greece were not powerful enough to put up an objection, and so accepted defeat. Let's now examine the way in which the League was undermined by decisions that were made outside of its jurisdiction. The most important of these was the Locarno Pact of 1925. The relationship between France and Germany remained hostile in the early 1920s, resulting in the French invading the industrial area of the Ruhr and taking Germany's coal. However, after Gustav Stresemann was appointed as the Foreign Secretary, relations began to improve. He invited the French Foreign Minister, Aristide Briand, to sign a new treaty between the two countries. They met in Locarno, in Switzerland, since this was neutral territory. Stresemann signed 7 treaties on behalf of Germany that formally accepted the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, including the land borders. Germany also gave up her claim to Alsace-Lorraine. This was important, because Germany had not been allowed to the peace conference in Paris, and so the treaty had been a diktat. However, because Germany was not yet a member of the League of Nations in 1925, this important peace deal had to take place outside of the League's mandate, or jurisdiction. This undermined the League's credibility, as it showed the powerful countries like France could operate without the League's intervention. In 1928, there was another significant event that took place outside the League of Nations, called the Kellogg-Briand Pact. It was named after the French Foreign Secretary and the American Secretary of State Frank Kellogg. 65 countries met in Paris, where they signed a huge non-aggression pact stating they would not go to war with one another. Since the USA was a part of this agreement, it had to take place outside of the League of Nations. This once again showed that individual, especially powerful countries could act independently of the League. It made the League appear like somewhere to simply air problems and debate issues rather than a place where real, meaningful treaties could be signed. Finally, and most importantly, it showed that the USA remained the most power. As a consequence, the League of Nations left the 1920s bruised but not defeated. They had proven their ability to negotiate peace agreements between smaller nations, and the use of moral condemnation had worked on some smaller nations, such as Greece. However, they had proved ineffective against the more powerful nations, most notably Italy due to the bully tactics of her dictator Mussolini. Furthermore, America had undermined the League by organizing a tremendous non-aggression pact between 65 nations without consulting the League. Let's now return to our overarching question of, to what extent did the League of Nations establish peace in the 1920s? Firstly, we must remember that the League faced a huge challenge during the 1920s due to the volatile nature of Europe, including several border disputes across the continent. The League were able to achieve some success, such as the negotiation of peace between Finland and Sweden over the Åland Islands, which proved that diplomacy could work if all parties were treated equally and fairly. However, this was very often not the case, as shown in 1923, when the more powerful nation of Italy was able to demand financial compensation and a formal apology from Greece, even though it had been Italy that had invaded the Greek island of Corfu. This proves there was clearly a disbalance in power across the members of the League, and therefore war-thirsty leaders, like Mussolini, could get away with using aggression. Finally, the League was undermined due to two important agreements that were made outside of the League. The Locarno Pact, which took place in Switzerland, and the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was organized by America, proved that the League was not necessary in order to achieve international peace. This made the League appear redundant, which would have a knock-on effect to how it was later perceived in the 1930s. Thank you for watching. Tune in to the next lecture, where we will be learning about the League's humanitarian work through the role of the commissions.